The helicopter cut through the heavy sky of Malibu like a blade, opening a wound in the fabric of the afternoon. Isabella held tightly to the strap of her medical bag while watching the Blackwood estate emerge between the rocks, a modern and imposing structure that seemed to challenge nature as it balanced between ancient stones and the turbulent sea. The enormous windows reflected the stormy sky, creating the illusion that the entire house was about to be swallowed by the clouds. She had never seen such an isolated residence. The nearest access road was 15 minutes away by helicopter, and the pilot had already warned that he would only return the next morning. For the next 9 hours, she would be completely alone with a man whom doctors at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center had described as a lost cause for traditional psychiatry. The landing was smooth, but Isabella felt her stomach tighten when the propellers stopped spinning and silence took over the place. A silence that wasn't just the absence of sound, but the presence of something unspoken, as if the walls of that house held secrets that weighed tons. "Dr. Isabella?" The voice came from behind, her deep and controlled. She turned and found a tall man with well-cut grey hair and eyes that seemed to have watched the world burn. Ethan Blackwood didn't match the image she had formed in her head. She expected to find someone defeated, bent by grief and disorders. Instead, she stood before a man who radiated silent authority, dressed in a dark button-up shirt and tailored pants. Only his eyes betrayed the inner storm. "Mr. Blackwood." She extended her hand, and when he shook it, she noticed that his fingers trembled almost imperceptibly. "Thank you for having me. I'm the one who should thank you for accepting." His voice carried a refined California accent, the kind you learn in expensive schools and perfect at international universities. "I imagine Dr. Mitchell explained the particularities of the case." Isabella nodded. Dr. Mitchell Sanders, her former supervisor and current bridge to special cases, had been economical with words, as always. Patient with episodes of severe insomnia, post-traumatic flashbacks, and extreme social isolation. 3-month contract. Mandatory presence from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. Differentiated compensation. What he hadn't mentioned was that the compensation was 4 times higher than any job she had ever accepted. There are other conditions that need to be clear from the start. Ethan took her bag without asking permission and began walking toward the house. The north wing is restricted. There is a guest room in the south wing where you will stay when you need to rest. The kitchen is always stocked, but I ask that you avoid making unnecessary noise during the day. They crossed a rock garden where tropical plants grew between oxidized metal sculptures. The entrance door was an impressive piece of wood and glass. That must have cost more than Isabella's car. Inside, the house was even more surprising. Very high ceilings, contemporary artwork on the walls, furniture that looked like it had come out of an international magazine. Everything very beautiful, very expensive, and completely lifeless. "Did you build all this?" she asked, breaking the professional protocol she usually religiously maintained. "My wife designed it. I just financed it." The answer was accompanied by a pause that lasted too long. Sarah was an architect. She had an obsession with houses that conversed with the natural landscape. Isabella noticed that he spoke in the past tense, but not in the definitive past of the dead. It was the past of someone who still talks to someone who is no longer there. They climbed a spiral staircase to the second floor, where the bedrooms were located. Hers was spacious and well-decorated, with an incredible view of the sea. Through the window she could see the waves breaking against the rocks below, creating a white foam that disappeared into the darkness of the approaching night. At 9 o'clock I'll be in the library. Ethan paused at the door, hesitating. "Isabella, may I call you that?" "Of course." "Have you worked with complicated grief cases before?" The question caught her off guard with its frankness. "I have. Why?" "Because I'm not a common patient, and you'll discover that sooner than you think." He left without explaining what he meant, leaving Isabella alone with a strange feeling in her chest. There was something in the way he pronounced her name that made her shiver, as if he had known her longer than the 2 hours of telephone conversation they had had before she was hired. At 9 o'clock sharp, she went down to the library. It was a huge room, with shelves that went from floor to ceiling and a lit fireplace that created dancing shadows on the walls. Ethan was sitting in a leather armchair, leafing through a book that she couldn't identify. There was a bottle of whiskey on a side table, but the glass next to it was empty. Punctual. He looked up at her. Good quality in a nurse. Good quality in any person. Isabella sat in the opposite armchair, maintaining professional distance, but studying his every move. Ethan Blackwood was clearly a man accustomed to control, but there were cracks in that facade. The way he held the book too tightly, how his eyes avoided hers after a few seconds, how he breathed a little deeper before speaking. Dr. Mitchell said you're a specialist in psychiatric trauma. Yes, I work mainly with patients who have had episodes of severe post-traumatic stress, family losses, accidents, events that... She hesitated, realizing she was treading on a minefield that deeply marked the psyche. And how do you deal with resistance? What kind of resistance? From patients who don't want to get better, who have become accustomed to the pain and are afraid of what comes after it. The question revealed more about him than any medical examination could. Isabella leaned slightly forward, using the tone that usually worked with difficult patients. Pain becomes familiar. Sometimes it's more frightening to imagine a life without it than to accept that it will always be there. Ethan closed the book slowly, keeping his eyes on her. You speak like someone who knows what they're talking about. Everyone who works with trauma knows pain up close, but some know it closer than others. There was something in the way he said this that made Isabella feel exposed, as if he could read her emotional history stamped on her face. She changed the subject. Dr. Mitchell mentioned chronic insomnia. How long has it been since you slept through the night? 7 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. The precision of the answer was disturbing. Since your wife's death. Since the fire. The correction came quickly and loaded with something she couldn't identify. Anger? Guilt? Sarah died in the fire. Isabella waited, but he didn't elaborate. She knew from experience that pressing at this moment would be counterproductive. Instead, she asked, "What do you do during these sleepless nights?" "I walk around the house. I read. I try to work, but I haven't been able to concentrate for months." He got up and went to the window, turning his back to her. "Sometimes I stay here looking at the sea. Sarah used to say that the sound of the waves was like the heart of the earth beating. You miss her. I miss who I was when she was alive." The phrase hung in the air like smoke. Isabella observed his silhouette against the window and had the strange sensation that she was seeing a man balancing on the edge of a precipice. Not the precipice of death, but the precipice of the decision to continue living. "Ethan," she said, using his name for the first time, "when was the last time you left this house?" "For her funeral." "That was over 7 months ago. 7 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. Don't you feel like going out, seeing people, breathing different air?" He turned to her, and for the first time that night, she saw something beyond. Control in his eyes. It was pure, raw, frightening vulnerability. Out there, people look at me like I'm a man who lost his wife. Here, I'm just a man who lost himself. It's more honest. Isabella felt her chest tighten. There was a tragic poetry in the way he expressed himself that touched her in a dangerous way. She was used to dealing with difficult patients, but she had never met someone who carried pain with such devastating elegance. "And what do you expect from me?" "Honestly, I don't know. Dr. Mitchell said you were the best with impossible cases." "I don't believe in impossible cases. Then you'll be the first to discover they exist." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of rain beginning to hit the windows. In a few minutes, what had started as a soft hiss turned into a furious storm. Lightning illuminated the sea outside, creating a spectacle of light and fury that seemed to perfectly match the growing tension inside the library. "Is the house prepared for storms?" Isabella asked, watching how the rain hammered the glass. Sarah made sure it was. She loved storms. Ethan returned to the armchair but didn't sit. Instead, he stood next to it, too close for professional protocol. "She said they cleaned the... Gare took away everything that wasn't good. You don't like them. I used to before. And now? Now they remind me of the last thing she said to me. Isabella waited, but he didn't continue. The tension in the air was almost palpable, a mixture of electricity from the storm and something more primitive, more dangerous, that had been growing between them since the moment they had greeted each other. "May I ask an indiscreet question?" she said. "You may." "Why me? Why not a psychiatrist, a therapist, someone with more experience in grief?" Ethan stared at her for a long moment, as if deciding how much of the truth he could reveal. "Because you have something that others don't." "What?" "You understand that some people are marked by life in a way that has no cure, only coexistence." The observation hit her like a punch to the stomach. It was as if he could see through her, through years of professional training and emotional distance, straight to the scars she carried that no one else knew existed. "How do you know this about me?" "By your eyes, and by the way you didn't try to convince me that everything will be okay." They looked at each other in silence, and Isabella realized she was entering dangerous territory. Something was happening there that went far beyond the typical professional relationship. A connection that she shouldn't be feeling, a mutual understanding that was both comforting and terrifying. The light flickered and went out. In the absolute darkness of the library, she heard his breathing change, becoming faster, more irregular. "Ethan?" The storm must have knocked out the generator. His voice came out tense. "This happens sometimes." "Are you okay?" "I am." But she could feel that he wasn't. There was something in the way he breathed in the dark that revealed barely controlled panic. "Where is the emergency generator?" "In the basement. But I can't." "Why?" "Sarah died in the dark." The words came out like a confession, loaded, with such intense pain that Isabella felt as if someone had opened a window to winter in the middle of the storm. She stood up, guided only by the sound of his breathing, and reached out until she found Ethan's arm. "I'll go. You stay here." "No." The answer came quickly, almost desperately. "Don't leave me alone in the dark." It was the first time he had admitted to needing anything, and the vulnerability in his voice broke something inside her. "Then we'll go together." They went down the stairs, slowly, Isabella in front, guiding Ethan by the hand. The house in the dark was a labyrinth of shadows and echoes, and she noticed how he became more tense with each step. When they reached the basement, she found the generator and managed to reconnect it, flooding the house with light again. When she turned around, she found Ethan leaning against the wall, his face pale and covered in sweat. "You need to sit down." "I'm fine." "No, you're not." She approached him, noticing how his hands were shaking. "This is a panic attack. Breathe with me." She began to guide him in deep, controlled breathing, a technique she had learned in her early years of training. But when she placed her hand on his chest to help him control his breathing rhythm, she felt something that made her stop. Scars. Several horizontal scars on the skin, some older, some more recent. Ethan noticed the exact moment when she discovered them. Their eyes met, and there was a mixture of shame and defiance in his gaze. "Now you know," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "Know what?" "Why no psychiatrist wanted to continue treating me." Isabella kept her hand on his chest, feeling the scars under her fingers. It should have been a clinical, professional moment, but there was something intensely intimate about that touch, that silent revelation in the basement of a house lost between rocks and storms. "How many times?" she asked, with no judgment in her voice. "5. The last was 3 weeks ago." "Why did you stop?" "Because I realized that it wasn't death I wanted. It was to feel something besides emptiness." The confession hung between them like a stretched thread about to break. Isabella knew she should step back, maintain professional distance, treat it as clinical information. But there was something in the way he looked at her, as if she were the first person in months to really see him, that prevented her from moving away. "And did it work?" she asked. "Did you feel something?" "I felt pain, but at least it was mine." The answer hit her like lightning. There was a devastating logic in that phrase, an understanding of the nature of pain that she intimately recognized. How many times had she herself preferred a known pain to an unknown emptiness? "Ethan," she said, still with her hand on his chest, "I need you to promise me something." "What?" "That if you feel like hurting yourself again, you'll call me first." "Why?" "Because maybe there's a way for you to feel something without destroying yourself in the process." They went back up to the library in silence, but something had fundamentally changed between them. The doctor-patient relationship had been replaced by something more complex, more dangerous. A mutual understanding that went beyond the professional and touched places that both had learned to keep closed. When they sat again in the armchairs, the storm outside had subsided, but the tension inside the library remained electric. "May I ask a question?" Ethan said. "You may." "How did you learn not to be afraid of other people's emotional darkness?" The question revealed that he had perceived something in her that few could see. "Who said I'm not afraid?" "The way you came down with me. How you touched my scars without backing away. How you're looking at me now." "And how am I looking at you?" "Like someone who recognizes what they see." Isabella felt her heart speed up. There was too much truth in that observation, a perception that left her exposed in a way she wasn't used to. Maybe that's why Dr. Mitchell chose me for this case. "It wasn't Dr. Mitchell who chose you." "What do you mean?" Ethan hesitated, as if deciding whether or not to open a door that could no longer be closed. "It was me who specifically asked for you." "But how?" "We never met before today. Not in person, but I knew who you were." Isabella's stomach contracted. "How?" "I researched nurses specializing in psychiatric trauma in Los Angeles. Your name appeared in several difficult cases that other professionals had given up on. That doesn't explain why you chose me specifically." Ethan got up and went to a shelf, removing a folder that was between the books. He returned and handed it to her. "Because I read about the case of Dr. Frank Carroll." The name hit Isabella like a slap. Dr. Frank Carroll. The psychiatrist she had accompanied for 6 months until his suicide attempt. The case that almost made her abandon the profession. The case that no one should know existed. "How did you—" "I have contacts in the medical field, and an obsession with understanding how some people manage to save others that no one else wants to touch." Isabella opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were copies of medical reports, articles about her specialization, and even photos of her at psychiatric conferences. There was information about her training, her successful cases, and also about her personal life, information she had never made public. "You investigated me. I needed to be sure you would be able to handle me." "And how did you come to the conclusion that I would be?" Ethan sat on the edge of her armchair, too close for any professional protocol. "Because you saved a man who had lost hope. And when he tried to kill himself anyway, you didn't give up on him. You stayed at the hospital during the entire surgery, followed the recovery, and only left when you were sure he would be okay." Isabella felt the world spinning around her. "You had no right to investigate my life." "I didn't. But I also have no right to continue living after what happened to Sarah." The phrase came out loaded with such deep guilt that she momentarily forgot her indignation. "What happened to Sarah, Ethan?" He stared at her for a long moment, and she saw the exact moment when he decided to tell the truth. "She discovered something about me, something that made her question everything we had lived through together." "What?" "That's a conversation for another night." "No." Isabella closed the folder and set it aside. "You investigated my life, broke my privacy, brought me here based on information you shouldn't have. The least you can do is be honest with me." Ethan remained silent for so long that she thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice came out as a whisper loaded with pain. "Sarah discovered that I loved her not only for who she was, but for how she made me feel about myself. And on the night of the fire, she told me that a love like that wasn't real love, it was emotional dependence." "And you argued?" "We argued. She left the house furious, driving in the storm. The car hit a tree and caught fire. He stopped, breathing with difficulty. If I hadn't said the things I said, if I hadn't been so selfish, she would still be alive. Isabella felt the pieces falling into place. The guilt, the isolation, the attempts at self-harm. Ethan wasn't just dealing with grief. He was dealing with the certainty that he was responsible for his own wife's death. "Ethan," she said, placing her hand on his arm, "accidents happen. Oh, you can't blame yourself for—" "Yes, I can." He stood up abruptly, moving away from her touch. "And you'll understand why when you know everything." "Then tell me everything." "I can't." "Why not?" "Because if I tell you, you'll leave, and I can't bear to be alone with this for another night." The confession came out raw, desperate, vulnerable, in a way that made Isabella's heart ache. There was so much fear in his voice, so much terror of being abandoned, that she felt like hugging him and promising that she wouldn't go anywhere. But she couldn't make that promise. Not yet, not without knowing the whole truth. "I'll stay tonight," she said, "and tomorrow night too. But you need to understand that I can't help you if I don't know what I'm dealing with." "I know. I just need more time." "How much time?" "I don't know. Maybe forever." They spent the rest of the night in a delicate dance between revelation and restraint. Ethan told about the first months after Sarah's death, about how he had isolated himself from the world, about the nightmares that prevented him from sleeping. Isabella talked about her specialization, about how she had learned to deal with difficult cases, about the satisfaction of seeing people rebuilding themselves after devastating losses. But there were layers of unspoken things between them, secrets that hung in the air like smoke, and a growing tension that had nothing to do with the doctor-patient relationship and everything to do with two people, marked by life recognizing something in each other. When the sun began to rise, painting the sea gold, Isabella realized that she had crossed a line she shouldn't have crossed. She was no longer there just as a nurse. She was there as a woman, attracted to a complex and dangerous man who carried secrets that could destroy them both. "I need to rest," she said, getting up from the armchair. "Of course." Ethan also stood up, but didn't move away. "Isabella." "Yes?" "Thank you for not running away when you saw the scars. Thank you for trusting me to see them." They looked at each other for a moment that lasted too long, and Isabella felt she was on the verge of something irreversible. If she stayed there one more second, if he took one more step toward her, everything would change. She left the library before that happened, but she knew it was already too late. Something had been awakened on that first night, something that would grow in the coming weeks until it became impossible to ignore. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Isabella tried to convince herself that she still had control over the situation, that she could still maintain the necessary professional distance, that she could still leave there with her heart intact. But deep down, she already knew she was lying to herself. Ethan Blackwood wasn't just a difficult patient. He was a man who had recognized in her something that she herself barely admitted existed. And that connection, that mutual understanding born of similar pain, would be more dangerous than any storm that could form over that house lost between rocks and sea. What she didn't know yet was that Ethan had omitted the most important part of the story. That his investigation of her had gone much deeper than he had admitted, and that the reason he had chosen her specifically had nothing to do with just her professional competence. It had to do with something much more disturbing, something he had discovered about her past that connected with his in a way she could never imagine. But this would only be revealed when it was too late for her to run away. Isabella woke to the sound of classical music echoing through the house. It was 3 in the afternoon, and the sun was coming in strong through the guest room window, creating golden patterns on the wooden floor. She had slept only 4 hours, but felt strangely alert, as if her body knew that something important was happening there that required her full attention. The music was coming from downstairs. It was a piece she didn't recognize, melancholic and intense, played on the piano with impressive technique. She dressed quickly and went down, following the sound until she reached a room she hadn't seen the night before. It was a music studio with a black grand piano positioned in front of a panoramic window overlooking the sea. Ethan was at the piano, completely absorbed in the music, his fingers sliding over the keys with an elegance that contrasted with the tension she had perceived in him the night before. He was wearing only a grey t-shirt and sweatpants, and there was something intensely intimate about seeing him like this, disarmed, lost in the music. She stood at the door, hesitating to interrupt. The piece he was playing was loaded with emotion, a melody that rose and fell like waves, sometimes delicate, sometimes stormy. It was as if he were talking to someone through the notes, telling a story that words couldn't express. When the music ended, the silence that followed was almost deafening. Ethan remained with his hands on the keys for a long moment, as if he didn't want to break the connection with what he had just created. "I didn't know you played," Isabella said softly. He turned, not seeming surprised that she was there. "Sarah taught me. She said music was the only language that didn't lie." "Was that her piece?" "It was ours. I composed it for her on our first wedding anniversary." He got up from the piano bench but didn't move away from the instrument. "I was never able to play it all the way through after she died. Until today." "What changed?" Ethan stared at her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "You?" The word hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that both knew they shouldn't explore. Isabella felt her heart speed up, but kept her voice controlled. "I'm not your wife, Ethan. I know exactly who you are." The way he said this sent a chill down her spine. There was something in his intonation, a certainty that went beyond what they had discussed the night before. "Do you really?" "I know more than you imagine." Isabella approached, crossing her arms. "Then tell me what you think you know." Ethan hesitated, as if deciding how much he could reveal without destroying everything. "I know you lost a baby 5 years ago. I know the child's father abandoned you when he found out about the pregnancy. I know you blame yourself for the loss even though you know it wasn't your fault." The world seemed to stop around her. This was information she had never shared professionally, intimate details of a time in her life that she had buried so deep that even she avoided thinking about it. "How did you know that?" "I have contacts at various hospitals in Los Angeles and an obsession with understanding people who can carry others' pain without collapsing." "You had no right." Her voice came out trembling, a mixture of anger and vulnerability that frightened her. "I didn't. But I needed to know if you would be able to understand what it's like to live with a guilt that no one else can carry for you." Isabella moved away from him, feeling invaded in a way that went far beyond the professional. "My pain is not the same as yours." "No, but it was born from the same place, from love that transforms into loss, from the certainty that if we had done something different, the people we loved would still be with us." The observation hit her with the force of a truth she had spent years trying to deny. "You don't know anything about what I felt. I know that you still talk to the child you lost. I know you have a recurring dream where you hold a baby that disappears when you wake up. I know you chose to specialize in psychiatric trauma because it's easier to care for others' pain than your own." Each word was like a precise stab at wounds she thought had healed. "How?" "Because I do the same thing. I study others' pain to avoid facing my own." Isabella sat in an armchair near the piano, feeling her legs weaken. "What kind of studies?" Ethan approached her but maintained a respectful distance. "Before Sarah died, we worked together. She was an architect, but she also had training in psychology. I'm a bioengineer. Our project was to map the neurological correlations of emotional trauma." "Map how?" "Discover if there is a biological pattern in the way the brain processes significant losses. If similar traumas create similar neurological responses in different people." The information began to form a disturbing picture in her mind. "And did you reach any conclusion?" "We did. And that's what killed Sarah." Isabella felt her stomach contract. "Explain." Ethan sat on the piano bench facing her. "We discovered that people who have gone through specific losses, death of children, emotional abandonment, guilt over traumatic events, develop almost identical neural patterns, as if pain created a unique biological signature. And Sarah discovered that I had started the research not out of scientific interest, but because I wanted to understand my own pain, my own traumas. What traumas? Ethan was silent. For a long moment, his eyes fixed on his hands. When I was 16, my younger sister drowned. I was watching her at the beach. I got distracted for a few minutes, and when I looked, she had disappeared. We found the body 2 hours later. Isabella felt her chest tighten. Ethan. For years, I lived with the certainty that I had killed her, that if I had paid attention, she would still be alive. I met Sarah in a group therapy for people who had lost family members. She had lost her brother in a car accident. You connected through pain. Exactly. And for years it worked. We helped each other carry the weight, until Sarah realized that I didn't love her just for who she was, but because she understood my guilt better than anyone else. Isabella began to understand the dimension of the problem. She questioned the nature of your love. She said our marriage was based on an unhealthy emotional dependence, that I used her as a crutch to avoid facing my own demons, and that this wasn't love, it was emotional parasitism. The phrase echoed in the silence of the studio like a gunshot. Isabella could imagine the devastation that such a revelation would cause in a marriage, the way it would question the entire basis of a relationship. And you argued. We argued. She said she was leaving, that she needed time to think about whether there was still something real between us besides shared pain. I said terrible things, trying to hurt her as she had hurt me, and she left, driving in the storm. The accident. The accident. Ethan took a deep breath, as if he still felt the impact of that night. But what Sarah didn't know, because she died before I could tell her, is that our research had revealed something else. What? That people with similar traumas not only develop similar neural patterns, they also instinctively recognize each other, as if there were an emotional frequency that only they can pick up. Isabella felt a chill run through her body. And when you researched me, I discovered that you had exactly the same pattern of neurological response as Sarah, the same signature of pain. The silence that followed was loaded with frightening implications. Isabella tried to process what she had just heard, tried to understand if she was being treated as a person or as an experiment. You brought me here because I'm neurologically compatible with your dead wife. I brought you here because you're the only person who can understand what it's like to carry a guilt that shouldn't exist, but does anyway. That doesn't answer my question. Ethan got up and walked to the window, turning his back to her. When I read your file, when I saw your history, I knew you were the only person in the world who could look at me without pity, without judgment, without trying to convince me it wasn't my fault. Because you think it also wasn't my fault for losing my child. Because I know it wasn't. And because I know that changes nothing. Guilt doesn't need to be rational to be real. Isabella stood up, feeling a mixture of anger and understanding that confused her. You manipulated me. I chose you. It's the same thing. It's not. He turned to her, and there was something wild in his eyes. Manipulation would be lying. To you about who I am, about what I want. I'm being completely honest with you. Honest. You investigated me without my consent, brought me here based on private information you shouldn't have, and now you tell me you chose me because I'm neurologically compatible with your dead wife. Where is the honesty in that? The honesty is in the fact that despite all this, what I'm feeling for you has nothing to do with Sarah. The declaration caught her completely off guard. What did you say? Ethan approached her, and there was an intensity in his movements that made her instinctively step back. I said that what I'm feeling for you has nothing to do with Sarah. It has nothing to do with neurological compatibility, nothing to do with shared pain, nothing to do with scientific research. Then what does it have to do with? With the fact that for the first time in 7 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days, I can imagine a future that isn't just survival. Isabella felt her heart dangerously accelerate. Ethan, you're confusing gratitude with... I'm not confusing anything. He stopped a few inches from her, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body, the masculine scent that had already become familiar. I'm feeling something I thought I would never feel again, and it's terrifying and wonderful at the same time. We've known each other for less than 24 hours. I feel like I've known you for a lifetime. Because you read my file. Because you invaded my privacy. No, because there's something between us that has nothing to do with what I read. Something that began the moment you touched my scars without backing away. Isabella knew she should leave. She knew she was entering dangerous territory, that the situation was escaping professional control in a way that could destroy them both. But there was something in the way he looked at her, a vulnerability so raw and honest that prevented her from moving. "This is madness," she whispered. "It is. But maybe a little madness is exactly what we need to get out of the hole we're..." Timothy stared at each other, the air between them charged with a tension that wasn't just sexual, but emotional, almost spiritual. It was as if they were recognizing in each other something they had lost long ago, the possibility of true connection, of understanding without judgment, of love that was born not from necessity, but from choice. The moment was interrupted by the sound of the phone ringing. Ethan hesitated, clearly not wanting to break the tension between them, but the phone continued to insist. "I need to answer," he said, his voice hoarse. "Answer it." He picked up the phone without moving away from her. "Hello?" Isabella saw his expression gradually change from irritation to concern, then to something that looked like fear. "When?" he asked, his voice tense. Pause. "No, absolutely not. I'm not going to talk to anyone about this." Another pause, longer. "I understood what you said. My answer is still no." He hung up the phone with excessive force, standing for a moment, with his hand still on the device. "Problems?" Isabella asked. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just my paranoia." "Paranoia about what?" Ethan looked at her, and she saw that he was making an important decision. It was a journalist, asking questions about the fire. "What kind of questions?" "About inconsistencies in the official report, about how long it took me to call the fire department, about the fact that Sarah left the house at 11 o'clock at night in a storm." Isabella felt her stomach tighten. "And what did you answer?" "That I have nothing to declare. But they won't give up. They never give up when they smell scandal." "Is there reason for scandal?" The question hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. Isabella saw the exact moment when Ethan decided to tell another part of the truth. Sarah didn't die in the accident. The world seemed to stop around her. "What do you mean?" "She died in the fire, but the fire happened before the accident." "I don't understand." Ethan walked to the piano and leaned on it, as if he needed something solid to support him. "Sarah left the house furious, driving in the storm, but 15 minutes later she came back, said she had forgotten something." "What?" "The files. From our research. She wanted to destroy everything, said our work was a scientific abomination, that we were playing with human pain as if it were a laboratory experiment." Isabella felt a chill grow in her stomach. "And then?" "Then she went to my office, took all the files, all the research, all the data we had collected over 2 years, and started burning everything in the fireplace." "And you tried to stop her?" "I tried. We argued again. She said she was going to report our work to the medical authorities, that she was going to expose everything we had done. I said she was destroying years of work, that we could help people with our research. And then?" Ethan was silent for so long that Isabella thought he wasn't going to continue. When he finally spoke, his voice came out as a devastated whisper. "Then? She said I was a sick man, obsessed with my own pain, incapable of loving anything that wasn't a version of my own tragedy, and that she would rather die than continue being complicit in my disease. My God." She threw more files into the fireplace, but the fire was too high. The flames jumped to the curtains, then to the furniture. In a few minutes, half the office was on fire. And Sarah? Sarah tried to put out the fire. I shouted for her to get out, said I would call the fire department. But she was obsessed with destroying the last files. She said she couldn't let that research exist in the world. Isabella could barely breathe. What happened? A beam from the ceiling collapsed. It hit Sarah on the head. She passed out in the middle of the flames. And you? I tried to get her out. I went into the middle of the fire, picked her up, managed to reach the door. But when I got out of the house, I realized she wasn't breathing. Tears were now running down his face without disguise, without restraint. She died in my arms, Isabella, and the last thing she told me was that I was a monster. Isabella approached him, all professional protocols forgotten in the face of the raw pain emanating from him. Ethan, you understand now why I can't sleep, why the scars, why the isolation. It wasn't just negligence that killed Sarah, it was my obsession, my inability to love her for who she was, and not for what she represented for my own healing. You are not responsible for her death. Yes, I am, and the worst of all is that, even knowing this, even carrying this guilt, I brought you here. Because I'm so selfish, so obsessed with my own pain that I'm capable of dragging another person into my hell. Isabella put her hands on his face, forcing him to look her in the eyes. Stop. Stop this now. Why? Because you're not a monster. You're a man who made mistakes, who carries guilt, who lost someone he loved, but that doesn't make you a monster. How can you be sure? Because monsters don't torture themselves for the pain they cause. Monsters don't spend 7 months trying to punish themselves for their mistakes. Monsters don't cry when they tell their worst truths. Ethan looked at her as if she were a miracle, something impossible to exist in the real world. How can you look at me like this? Like what? Like I'm worth saving. Because you are. Even knowing I brought you here for selfish reasons? Even knowing that. Even knowing I could hurt you like I hurt Sarah. You won't hurt me. How can you be sure? Isabella hesitated because she wasn't sure. Not about the future, not about what could happen between them, but she was sure of one thing. Because this time you're being honest from the beginning. You told me your worst truths before I fell in love with you. Who said you're going to fall in love with me? The question hung in the air, loaded with dangerous possibilities. Isabella realized she had revealed more than she intended, had admitted a vulnerability that could destroy her. I didn't say I will, she whispered. I said it hasn't happened yet. 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 They stared at each other, and Isabella knew she had crossed another irreversible line. She was no longer just a nurse caring for a difficult patient. She was a woman recognizing in a man something she had given up looking for, the possibility of true love born of mutual understanding. Isabella, Ethan said, his voice hoarse with emotion, I need to show you something. What? The North Wing? She felt her heart speed up. You said it was restricted. It is, but you need to see what's there. You need to completely understand what you're getting involved with before it's too late to run. And if I don't want to run, then you'll have to live with secrets that could destroy us both. They left the music studio and walked in silence through the corridors of the house. The North Wing was on the other side of the property, separated by a dark wooden door that Ethan opened with a key he kept on a chain around his neck. On the other side of the door, there was a long corridor that ended in a circular metal staircase. They went down, and Isabella realized they were going to a basement that didn't appear on the main floor plan of the house. Sarah designed this space as a laboratory, Ethan explained as they descended. She wanted our work to be developed in a controlled environment, isolated from external interference. You did experiments here? We did, with volunteers, most of the time, people who had experienced trauma and wanted to contribute to the research. They reached the end of the staircase and Ethan turned on the lights. What Isabella saw made her stop in the middle of the path. It was a complete laboratory, with neurological monitoring equipment, state-of-the-art computers, and reclining chairs with connected electrodes. But what caught her attention were the walls covered with graphs, tables, and photographs. Dozens of photographs of different women, all with expressions of pain, all connected to monitoring equipment. And in the center of it all, on a separate table, was a folder with her name. "My God," she whispered. "Welcome to my laboratory, Isabella, the place where I studied you for weeks before deciding to bring you here." She approached the table and opened the folder. Inside were photographs of her entering and leaving the hospital where she worked, reports on her most difficult cases, and something that made her tremble, audio recordings of therapeutic sessions where she had talked about her own loss. "You recorded me?" "Not me. I hired someone for that. That's illegal." "It is, but I needed to know if you were really compatible before bringing you here." Isabella leafed through the rest of the file, finding detailed analyses of her behavior patterns, her emotional reactions, even theories about her personality based on unauthorized observations. "You didn't choose me," she said, her voice trembling with anger and betrayal. "You hunted me. I studied you. It's the same thing." "No, it's not, because everything I discovered about you only confirmed what I felt the first moment I heard your voice on the phone." "Which was?" "That you were the only person in the world who could completely understand me, and the only one I could love without trying to transform her into a version of someone else." Isabella closed the folder and moved away from the table, feeling violated in a way that went far beyond the physical. "You don't know me. You know data about me, reports, analyses. That's not knowing a person." "You're right, but I want to know you for real. I want you to know me for real, and that's why I'm showing you all of this." "Showing what? That you're capable of anything to get what you want?" "Showing that this time I choose to be honest from the beginning. That this time I'm not going to hide who I am or what I did until it's too late." Isabella looked around the laboratory, at the photos, the equipment, the evidence of an obsession that had consumed 2 years of his life. And Sarah knew all this? Sarah helped create all this, until she realized that our research had become an extension of my own neurosis. And when she wanted to stop, you refused. I refused, and that killed her. The silence that followed was loaded with devastating truths. Isabella tried to process everything she had discovered, tried to understand if there was still something salvageable in that situation, or if she should run as fast as possible. "Why are you showing me this?" she finally asked. "Because I want you to make an informed decision about staying or leaving. And if I choose to leave, then I'll accept it, and I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I lost the only person who could have saved me from myself. And if I stay, then we'll have to discover together if it's possible to build something real from rotten foundations." Isabella looked at him, trying to see beyond the manipulation, beyond the obsession, beyond the secrets. And what she saw was, I see, destroyed man desperately trying to find a reason to continue living. A man who had made terrible mistakes, but who was willing to reveal his worst truths in the hope of finding redemption. "I need time to think," she said. "How much time?" "Don't know. Maybe forever." Ethan nodded, accepting her uncertainty with a grace she hadn't expected. "I'll be here, waiting." They went up from the laboratory in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the main floor, Isabella headed to her room but stopped in the middle of the staircase. "Ethan." "Yes?" "Your research, did it work? Did you really manage to map neurological patterns of trauma?" "We did." "Why?" "Because if it worked, then maybe you were right about me. Maybe I really am neurologically compatible with Sarah. And would that change anything?" Isabella was silent for a long moment, struggling with a question that terrified her. "It would if it meant you're falling in love with me for the right reasons." "And what would be the right reasons?" "For who I am, not for who I resemble in neurological terms." Ethan climbed a few steps, approaching her. "Can I tell you a secret?" "What?" "When you touched my scars last night, when you didn't back away, when you looked at me without pity, at that moment, I completely forgot about Sarah. I forgot about the research, forgot about neurological compatibility, forgot about everything except the brave woman in front of me. And now? Now I know that what I'm feeling has nothing to do with science. It has to do with the fact that you're the first person in years who makes me want to be better than I am. Isabella felt her heart tighten with the sincerity in his voice. But how can I trust you after all this? You can't. Not yet. But maybe you can learn. And if I can't, then we'll both have to live with one more loss, but at least this time it will be an honest loss. Isabella climbed the rest of the stairs, leaving Ethan in the library. But when she reached her room, she couldn't go in. Instead, she leaned against the door, trying to process everything she had discovered that day. Ethan Blackwood was a dangerous man, obsessive, manipulative, capable of crossing ethical lines without hesitation, but he was also a man destroyed by guilt, someone who carried traumas so deep that they had shaped his entire adult life. And her. She was a woman who had spent years avoiding real connections because she was afraid of being hurt again. A woman who had chosen to care for others. Pain because it was safer than facing her own. Maybe they really were compatible, not neurologically but emotionally. Two broken people who recognized each other in each other's darkness. The question was, would this be enough to build something real? Or would it just be a more sophisticated version of the same emotional dependence that had destroyed Ethan and Sarah? Isabella didn't know the answer, but she knew that despite everything she had discovered, she didn't want to leave. Not yet. Not before finding out if there was something salvageable in that dangerous and terrifying connection that was growing between them. Outside, clouds were beginning to form again on the horizon. Another storm was approaching the isolated house between rocks and sea, and this time, Isabella knew that when the lights went out, she wouldn't be afraid of the dark. She would be afraid of what she might find in it. Isabella spent 3 days avoiding Ethan, 3 days circling around the house like a ghost, fulfilling her professional obligations with the coldness of a machine, but maintaining an emotional distance that physically hurt. She knew he respected her need for space, but she could feel his gaze on her whenever they were in the same room, a silent intensity that made her tremble inside. On the 4th night, she found him in the winter garden at 2 in the morning. He was sitting on the floor among the tropical plants, his back leaning against a glass wall that overlooked the stormy sea. There was a bottle of whiskey beside him, but the glass was untouched. In his hands, he held a photograph that she couldn't clearly see in the dim light. "Can't sleep either?" she asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "I never can." He raised his eyes to her, and even in the faint light she could see the deep exhaustion that marked his face. "But today is different." "Different how?" "Today I can't sleep because I'm afraid." Isabella approached slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Afraid of what?" "That you've decided to leave." The vulnerability in his voice hit her like a punch to the chest. For 3 days she had fought against the part of her that wanted to comfort him, that wanted to forget all the disturbing revelations and give in to what she was feeling. And now, seeing him there, broken and honest, that part was winning. "I should leave," she said, but her voice carried no conviction. "You should. You manipulated me, investigated me, brought me here based on lies." "I did." "And yet, you expect me to stay?" Ethan put the photograph in his pocket and stood up slowly, without approaching her. "I don't expect anything. I just hope you're braver than I am." "Brave how?" "Brave enough to risk being happy, even knowing you might get hurt in the process." Isabella felt tears burning in her eyes. "You think I don't have courage?" "I think you have too. Much courage. That's why you're so afraid." The observation hit her directly in the center of the truth she had been avoiding facing. It wasn't just anger that kept her away from him. It was terror. Terror of giving herself to someone who had the power to completely destroy her. "If I stay," she whispered, "how will I know if what you feel is real or if it's just another experiment? You won't know. You'll have to trust. And if you hurt me like you hurt Sarah, then you'll hate me for the rest of your life, and I'll deserve it." They stared at each other in the silence of the garden, surrounded by the sound of rain against the glass and the electric tension that had grown between them for days. Isabella knew she was at a crossroads. She could choose safety, leave and continue her controlled and predictable life, or she could choose risk, plunge into the unknown with a man who could save her or destroy her. "Show me," she finally said. "Show." "What?" "The photograph you were holding." Ethan hesitated, then took the photo from his pocket and handed it to her. It was an image of Sarah, but not a formal or posed photo. It was Sarah laughing, captured in a spontaneous moment, with her hair disheveled by the wind and her eyes shining with genuine joy. "She was beautiful," Isabella said, feeling a pang of jealousy that surprised her. "She was, but that's not why. I keep this photo." "Why then?" "Because it's the only photo where she seems really happy, where there's no pain in her eyes, no weight in her smile, and I spend hours looking at it trying to remember what it was like to love someone without." Trying to heal them, Isabella returned the photograph, moved by his brutal honesty. "Can you remember?" "Sometimes. And when I can, I realize I never loved Sarah that way. I never managed to see her just as the wonderful woman she was. I always saw her as someone who could understand my pain. And with me it's different." Ethan approached her slowly, giving her time to back away if she wanted. "With me you're different because when I look at you, I don't see my pain reflected. I see something I've never had before." "What?" "Hope." The word hung between them, loaded with possibilities that frightened them both. Isabella felt her heart speed up when he stopped a few inches from her, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body, the masculine scent that had already become familiar. "Ethan," she whispered, "if we do this, there will be no going back. I know. You could destroy me. I could. And you could save me. And if I can't, then at least we tried." He raised his hand and touched her face gently, as if she were made of crystal. It was the first truly intimate touch between them, and Isabella felt every cell in her body awaken to his proximity. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice hoarse with contained emotion. In response, she leaned into his touch, closing her eyes and allowing herself to feel for the first time in years. "I'm not sure of anything, but I'll risk it anyway." The kiss began hesitantly, almost reverently, as if both were discovering something sacred, but it quickly transformed into something more urgent, more desperate, years of loneliness and pain, being channeled into an encounter that was both carnal and spiritual. Isabella gave herself completely, allowing all the barriers she had built over the years to collapse. Ethan's hands on her body were both gentle and possessive, as if he were memorizing every curve, every texture, every reaction of hers. They made love right there, in the winter garden, surrounded by plants that grew toward the light and by the sound of the storm outside. It was intense and devastating, a connection that went far beyond the physical and touched places that both had kept closed for too long. When they finished, they remained entwined on the floor, breathing with difficulty, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened between them. "This changes everything," Isabella whispered against his chest. "Changes everything," he agreed, his fingers playing with her hair. "And now? Now we discover if we can build something real from this." They remained like that for hours, talking in whispers about dreams, fears, hopes. Ethan told about the difficult childhood after his sister's death, about how he had closed himself emotionally until meeting Sarah. Isabella talked about the pain of losing the baby, about how she had chosen to care for others to avoid caring for herself. It was as if, after giving themselves physically, they had found a way to give themselves emotionally as well. An intimacy that neither had experienced before, free from the neuroses and defenses that normally governed their relationships. When the sun began to rise, painting the garden gold, Isabella knew she had crossed a point of no return. She was no longer the nurse hired to care for a difficult patient. She was a woman in love with a complicated man, willing to fight for something that could save or destroy them. "I need to get ready," she said, reluctant to break the moment. "Of course." Ethan helped her up, but didn't release her immediately. "Isabella?" Yes? Don't regret it, please, don't regret it. Never. She went up to her room with her heart overflowing with contradictory emotions. Happiness, fear, hope, terror, all mixed in an intensity that made her feel more alive than she had felt in years. But as she showered, trying to wash his scent from her skin, a doubt began to grow in her mind. Could it be that Ethan was being sincere about his feelings, or was all of that part of a more elaborate experiment? The doubt transformed into disturbing certainty when she went down to the kitchen and found the door to Ethan's office ajar. She knew she shouldn't peek, that she should respect his privacy, but something pushed her toward the door. From inside she could hear Ethan's voice talking on the phone. Yes, she reacted exactly as you predicted. No, there was no significant resistance after the initial revelation. The emotional bond formed within the expected time frame. Isabella felt her blood freeze in her veins. He was talking about her as if she were an experiment, reporting reactions and behaviors to someone. The physical responses were consistent with the Sarah pattern. Yes, the neurological compatibility translated into effective compatibility. No, she doesn't suspect she's being monitored. Each word was like a stab to the chest. Isabella moved away from the door, trying to process what she had just heard. Everything had been a lie. The vulnerability, the intimacy, the connection she had felt. Everything was part of a carefully orchestrated plan. She ran up to her room, grabbed her bag, and began packing with trembling hands. She needed to get out of there before he realized. She had discovered the truth. She needed to escape before he found a new way to manipulate her. But when she was finishing packing her things, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Ethan knocked on the bedroom door. "Isabella, may I come in?" "No." Her voice came out choked, revealing the tears she had begun to shed. "What happened?" "You know very well what happened." Ethan opened the door even without permission and found her packing. His expression changed immediately when he understood the situation. "You heard the call." "I heard. I can explain." "There's nothing to explain." Isabella closed the suitcase with excessive force, avoiding looking at him. "You got what you wanted, collected your data, confirmed your theories, proved that you can manipulate a vulnerable woman. That's not it." "Then what is it?" She turned to him, and the pain in her eyes made him step back. "What was that call? Who were you talking to?" Ethan was silent for a moment, clearly struggling with how much of the truth he should reveal. "It was with Dr. Mitchell." "Dr. Mitchell?" The revelation hit her like a shot. "He's involved in this?" "He helped me find you, helped me convince you to accept the job." Isabella felt the world crumbling around her. Dr. Mitchell was her mentor, someone she completely trusted. Knowing he was involved in the manipulation made her question everything she had built professionally. "You planned all this from the beginning." "Not everything. The feelings weren't planned." "How can I believe you?" "Because you know me, because you were with me last night, because you saw who I really am. I saw who you wanted me to think you were." Ethan approached her, but Isabella backed away, putting the bed between them. "Please let me explain." "Explain then. Explain how everything that happened between us was real when you were reporting my reactions to someone else." "Dr. Mitchell is my therapist." The revelation caught her off guard. "What?" "After Sarah's death, after the attempts to hurt myself, Dr. Mitchell began treating me. He was the one who suggested I seek specialized professional help, and he specifically suggested that you look for me. He mentioned your work, said you were exceptional with difficult cases, but the decision to investigate you, to bring you here was mine." Isabella tried to process the information, but she was still too hurt to think clearly. "And the call? What were you reporting to him?" "My feelings, my reactions. He asked me to keep in touch, to tell him how I was feeling with you here. And you told him you slept with me as if it were an interesting clinical development. I told him that for the first time in months, I managed to feel something besides pain. That for the first time since Sarah, I managed to imagine a future. Using scientific terminology, talking about neurological compatibility and behavior patterns." Ethan lowered his head, clearly ashamed. "It's how I learned to deal with emotions. transforming them into data, into something I can analyze and control. And me, am I just another data set for you? No. He raised his eyes to her, and there was a devastating sincerity in his gaze. You're the first person who made me completely forget about data and analyses. That's why I'm so scared. Isabella wanted to believe him. Every fiber of her being wanted to accept the explanation, to forgive him for the clinical way he had described, the night they had spent together. But the wound was too deep, the sense of betrayal too intense. I can't trust you anymore, she said, picking up the suitcase. Isabella, please. No. She headed for the door, but he blocked her path. Give me a chance to prove this is real. How? How will you prove I'm not being analyzed, studied, transformed into another one of your research projects? Ethan was silent, clearly without an answer to the question, and that silence was more devastating than any word. That's what I thought, Isabella said, going around him to leave the room. Where are you going? Far away from here, far away from you. She went down the stairs quickly, Ethan right behind her. When they reached the main hall, he held her by the arm, gently but firmly. Don't go. Not like this. Let me go. Not until you listen to. Feas kotu, I've heard enough. You don't understand. Without you here, I won't be able to what? Finish your research, collect more data on psychological trauma. Continue living. The confession came out raw, desperate, loaded with a vulnerability that made Isabella stop fighting against his arm. What? Before you arrived, I was preparing to give up. The scars, the isolation, all of that was preparation for the end. But you changed that. Changed because I'm neurologically compatible with your dead wife. Changed because when I look at you, I see a reason to try to be better than I am. Isabella felt tears burning in her eyes again. How can I know if this is true? Because I'll prove it. How? Ethan released her and walked to a desk in the hall from which he took a key. By destroying everything. Everything what? The research, the files, all the data I collected about you, about Sarah, about anyone else. I'll burn it all. Isabella watched him, trying to detect manipulation in his movements, falsehood in his expression, but all she saw was a desperate man trying to prove something that even he wasn't sure was true. And if you destroy everything, and I still leave, then at least I'll know I did the right thing. They went down to the laboratory in the north wing, where Ethan began systematically destroying years of work. He burned files, deleted data from computers, dismantled equipment. It was like watching a man erase his own professional identity in the hope of finding a true emotional identity. Isabella observed him in silence, divided between admiration for his determination and skepticism about his motivations. Was it genuine remorse or just another sophisticated form of manipulation? When he finished, the laboratory was in ruins, years of research reduced to ashes and twisted metal. There, he said, turning to her, there's nothing between us anymore except what we feel for each other. And what do we feel? You know what you feel. And I feel that you're the first person who makes me want to live for the future, not the past. Isabella wanted to believe. She desperately wanted to accept that all of this was real, that the connection between them went beyond neurological compatibility or psychological experiments. But there was too much fear, too many wounds. I need time, she finally said. How? Much time? I don't know. They went up from the destroyed laboratory, and when they reached the main hall, they found someone waiting for them. A man in a dark suit with a police badge and a serious expression. Mr. Ethan Blackwood. Yes. Inspector Robert Curtis, Los Angeles Police Department. I need to ask some questions about your wife's death. Isabella felt her stomach contract. The situation was already complicated enough, and now there was a legal element that could destroy any chance of a future between them. What kind of questions? Ethan asked, visibly tense. We received new information about the night of the fire, information that suggests inconsistencies in your original statement. What information? The inspector looked at Isabella, clearly uncomfortable with her presence. "Maybe it's better if we talk in private." "She can stay," Ethan said. "I have nothing to hide." "Are you sure? Because the accusations are quite serious." "What accusations?" "That you altered the crime scene, that you removed evidence, and that you may have intentionally caused the fire that killed your wife." The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella looked at Ethan, trying to read his expression, trying to understand if there were more secrets he hadn't revealed. "That's ridiculous," Ethan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it? Then can you explain why your neighbors reported hearing screams coming from your house an hour before the fire? Why the fire department's report was altered after its first version? Why you took 45 minutes to call for help?" Each question was like a bullet, revealing details that Ethan had never mentioned. Isabella felt the ground disappearing beneath her feet when she realized there were even more lies, even more secrets. "I can explain everything," Ethan said, but his hands were visibly shaking. "Then explain." "Sarah and I argued. We argued badly. She threatened to leave me, said things that made me angry, very angry. And I held her. Not to hurt her, but to stop her from leaving. We fought," she screamed, "said I was a monster." Isabella felt nausea growing in her stomach. "My God!" She managed to break free, ran to the office, started burning the files. I tried to stop her. We argued again. That's when the flames spread. "And after I panicked, I saw Sarah fallen, the fire spreading, and for a terrible moment, I thought about letting it happen." The confession came out as a whisper, but echoed in the hall like a shout. Isabella covered her mouth with her hands, horrified by what she was hearing. "But you didn't," the inspector said, noting everything in a pad. "No. I carried her out. I tried to resuscitate her. I called the fire department, but I delayed because I needed to invent a version of the story that wouldn't incriminate me. A version that omitted the domestic violence. It wasn't domestic violence. It was a moment of loss of control. That resulted in your wife's death." Ethan didn't answer, and his silence was more incriminating than any confession. Isabella stared at him, trying to reconcile the man who had made love to her the night before with the man who had just admitted to having considered letting his wife die in the fire. "Mr. Blackwood," the inspector said, "I'll need you to come with me for a formal statement." "Can I call my lawyer?" "You can, but I suggest you do it quickly. We have witnesses, physical evidence, and now your confession. The prosecutor will ask for preventive detention." Isabella watched Ethan being taken away in silence, her mind trying to process everything that had happened in that devastating morning. In a few hours she had discovered she was being manipulated, that her feelings were part of an experiment, and that the man she was falling in love with might be a murderer. When she was alone in the empty house, surrounded by the echo of all the lies she had been fed, Isabella finally allowed the tears to come. She cried for the naivety that had made her believe she could find true love. She cried for the connection she had felt, and that she now knew was false. And she cried for the broken man who had destroyed everything he touched, including her. But, as she cried, a part of her still refused to accept that everything had been a lie. The way he had touched her, how he had looked at her, the vulnerability he had shown. Would it be possible to fake all that? Or was it just more proof of how good his ability to manipulate was? Isabella no longer knew what to believe. She no longer knew whom to trust. She only knew she needed to get out of that house before she too was destroyed by the lies and obsessions that inhabited it. But when she went to get her suitcases, she found something that made her stop. A letter on top of the bed, with her name written in Ethan's elegant handwriting. Inside, a single phrase that would change everything. "If she knows the origin of our bond, she will run. But if she doesn't know, it will never be real." It was a quote from Sarah's diary, and below in Ethan's handwriting, "Now you know everything, and you can choose if you want it to be real." Isabella held the letter with trembling hands, realizing that even being arrested, even having his life destroyed, Ethan had found a way to give her the choice that Sarah never had. The choice between painful truth and comfortable lie, between real love and love based on illusions, between staying and fighting for something that could save them, or running and staying safe, but alone. It was the hardest choice of her life, and for the first time, she didn't know what her answer would be. Isabella spent 2 days in the empty house, walking through the corridors like a ghost, trying to decide whether she should run or fight. Ethan's letter was always in her hands, the words becoming clearer with each reading. Now you know everything, and you can choose if you want it to be real. On the morning of the 3rd day, she made her decision. She found Dr. Mitchell in his office at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, exactly where she expected him to be. He didn't seem surprised to see her, just tired, as if he knew this conversation was inevitable. I came for answers, she said, sitting in the armchair in front of his desk without being invited. I imagine so. Dr. Mitchell took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a gesture she recognized as his way of buying time to think. What do you want to know? Everything. From the beginning. Isabella. No. She leaned forward, her eyes fixed on him. You betrayed me. You who were my mentor, who taught me about medical ethics, who made me believe that caring for people was about true compassion. You delivered me to an obsessed man as if I were an object. Dr. Mitchell sighed deeply, aging 10 years in a few seconds. It wasn't like that. Then how was it? Ethan sought help after the self-harm attempts. He came to my office one night, bleeding, desperate, talking about how he wanted to die but couldn't kill himself. And you decided the solution was to use me as a guinea pig. I decided he needed someone who understood real trauma, someone who wouldn't pity him, who wouldn't try to cure his guilt with empty words. Dr. Mitchell put his glasses back on and stared at her. You were the only person I knew capable of handling him, because I also carry guilt, because you also survived the unbearable. Isabella felt anger growing in her chest. And you thought that gave you the right to manipulate me? I thought maybe you could help each other. By lying to me. Omitting information, making me believe I was accepting a normal job? Dr. Mitchell was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of years of regret. Would you have accepted if you had known the truth? No. And he would have died. The statement hung in the air like a bomb. Isabella tried to process the implications, tried to understand if Dr. Mitchell was trying to justify the unjustifiable, or if he had really saved Ethan's life. How can you be sure? Because the night before you arrived at the house, he called me, said that if it didn't work, if you couldn't understand him, he wouldn't try anything else. He would end it all. Isabella felt her chest tighten. He said that? He did, and I believed him. Ethan is many things, obsessive, manipulative, even dangerous, but he doesn't lie about death. And now he's in jail, accused of killing his wife. Your intervention worked very well. Dr. Mitchell got up and walked to the window, looking at the city movement below. There are things about Sarah you don't know. What things? She wasn't the innocent victim Ethan made her out to be. Sarah had problems. What kind of problems? Severe bipolar disorder, psychotic episodes, self-destructive tendencies. She had attempted suicide 3 times before meeting Ethan. The information hit Isabella like a punch. Why did he never mention this? Because he idealized her after her death, transformed her into a saintly martyr to feed his own guilt. But the truth is that Sarah was a very sick woman who refused to take medication. And their research? It was her idea. Sarah was obsessed with understanding her own mind, with mapping the neurological patterns of her illness. Ethan just provided the technical knowledge. Isabella tried to reconcile this version with everything Ethan had told her. And the night of the fire. Sarah was in a psychotic break. She had stopped taking medication for weeks, was paranoid, Believed Ethan was trying to control her mind through the research. And was he? Dr. Mitchell turned to her and there was deep sadness in his eyes. Not intentionally, but Ethan has always been obsessed with control, mainly control over pain, his and others. Isabella stood up, needing to move while processing all these revelations. Why are you telling me this now? Because you deserve to know the complete truth before deciding what to do. And what is the complete truth? That Ethan is a broken man who made terrible choices, but he's not a murderer. That Sarah was a sick woman who destroyed herself despite all his efforts to save her. And that you two can save each other if you can overcome all the lies and manipulations. Isabella stopped walking and stared at him. How can you be so sure? Because I saw how he changed since you arrived. In our sessions, for the first time in months, he talked about the future, about hope, about the possibility of being happy again. But he reported my reactions as if I were an experiment. Reported because that's how he learned to deal with emotions, by transforming them into data. But you must have noticed that the more time you spent together, the less clinical our conversation became, and the more personal it became. Isabella remembered the call she had heard, the subtle change in Ethan's voice tone over the days. It was true that he had begun to talk about her in a less scientific and more emotional way. Even if all this is true, she said, how can I trust him? Again, you can't. Trust is something that needs to be built again from scratch. The question is, do you want to try? Isabella was silent for a long moment, struggling with contradictory emotions. Anger, hurt, but also something deeper, a desperate longing for the man she had met that first night, vulnerable and honest in the dark. Where is he now? County jail, awaiting trial. Can I visit him? You can, but Isabella. Dr. Mitchell approached her, placing a paternal hand on her shoulder. If you decide to fight for him, it will be the hardest battle of your life. You'll have to face not just the legal problems, but all his obsession, all the demons he carries. And if I don't fight? Then you'll both continue to be prisoners of your own pain. Isabella left the office with more questions than answers, but with a certainty growing in her chest. No matter how many lies were between them, no matter how complicated the situation was, she wouldn't be able to live with the doubt about what could have been. 3 days later, she was sitting in a cold, lifeless visiting room at the jail, waiting for Ethan. When he appeared, wearing the orange uniform of the inmates, she almost didn't recognize him. He had lost weight, his eyes were hollow and lifeless, and he moved like a defeated man. But when he saw her, something lit up in his gaze, hope, fear, love, all mixed in an intensity that made her tremble. You came, he said, his voice hoarse. I came. They stared at each other for a long moment, the weight of everything that had happened between them hanging in the air like smoke. I didn't expect you to come, he continued, sitting in the chair across from her. Neither did I. Why did you come? Isabella took a deep breath, preparing for the most difficult conversation of her life. Because I need to know if there's something real between us, or if it was all part of your obsession. Ethan lowered his eyes, clearly struggling with the answer. It started as an obsession. And how does it end? I don't know. It depends on you. On me? On you believing that a man can change, that someone who has spent his entire life trying to control pain can learn to simply feel it. Isabella studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation, of falsehood, but all she saw was honest exhaustion, a vulnerability that seemed genuine. Dr. Mitchell told me about Sarah, about her illness. Ethan's shoulders curved, as if the weight of the world had increased. He had no right. Yes, he did. I deserved to know the truth. The truth is that I failed Sarah as a husband, as a researcher, as a human being, and I was failing you in the same way. How so? Trying to transform you into what I needed instead of loving who you really are. Isabella felt tears burning in her eyes. And who am I really? Ethan raised his eyes to her, and there was a clarity in his gaze that she had never seen before. You're a brave woman who dedicates her life to caring for broken people. You're intelligent, compassionate, stronger than you imagine, and you're capable of loving someone despite all their flaws. How can you know that? Because you're here, because after everything you discovered about me, after all the lies and manipulations, you still came to see me. Isabella wiped the tears that began to roll down her face. That doesn't mean I'm going to forgive you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can be better. How? You're in jail accused of homicide. The charges will be dropped. How can you be sure? Because I hired the best criminal attorney in Los Angeles, and because we have evidence that Sarah was in a psychotic break on the night of the fire. What evidence? Recordings she made that day. Recordings where it's clear she was delusional, threatening to kill herself, saying disconnected things about conspiracies. Isabella felt a pang of hope. Why didn't you show this before? Because protecting her image was more important than protecting mine, but now, he hesitated, now I have something more important to protect. What? The possibility of a future with you. The words hung between them, loaded with promises and risks. Isabella knew she was at a crossroads. She could choose safety, leave, and try to forget everything that had happened. Or she could choose to fight for something that could be extraordinary or devastating. If the charges are dropped, she said slowly, what will happen? I'll go back home. I'll try to rebuild my life, and I'll wait for you to decide if you want to be part of it. And if I decide I don't want to, then I'll accept it, and I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful for the days we had together. Isabella stared at him, trying to see beyond the words, trying to detect if there was real sincerity or just more sophisticated manipulation. But something had changed in him. The frantic obsession had been replaced by a calmness that seemed genuine. Ethan, she said, if we do this, it will have to be completely different. No lies, no omissions, no studying me as if I were an experiment. I know. You'll have to learn to love me for who I am, not for what I represent for your healing. I know. And you'll have to accept that I also have wounds, also have traumas, also need care. I know. Isabella was silent for a long moment, struggling with the most important decision of her life. Finally, she extended her hand across the table, touching his fingers through the bars that separated them. Then let's try. The smile that illuminated Ethan's face was like seeing the sun rise after an endless storm. Really? Really. But with conditions. Any condition. First, therapy. For you, for me, for both of us together. No trying to solve our problems alone. I accept. Second, total transparency. If you have any thought, any feeling, any memory that affects me, I want to know. I accept. Third, slowly, we'll rebuild our relationship from scratch, like two normal people who met under extraordinary circumstances. I accept. Isabella squeezed his hand, feeling a connection that for the first time seemed completely honest. Then I'll be waiting when you get out of here. It could take months. I'll wait. I might come out of here even more broken than when I went in. We'll fix ourselves together. Ethan brought her hand to his lips, kissing it through the bars with a reverence that made her heart speed up. I love you, Isabella, not for how you make me feel about myself, not because you're compatible with Sarah, not for any scientific or psychological reason. I love you because you're you. And I love you, she whispered back, despite everything. 6 months later, the charges against Ethan were formally dropped. Sarah's recordings, along with detailed psychiatric reports about her mental state, proved that her death had been the result of an accident during a psychotic break. The district attorney admitted there was no legal basis to sustain homicide charges. Isabella was waiting at the jail door when he came out on a sunny September morning. Ethan looked different, thinner with more grey hair, but there was a peace in his eyes that she had never seen before. They hugged in the middle of the street, crying and laughing at the same time, like two people who had survived a devastating storm and found each other on the other side. "Where are we going?" he asked when they finally separated. "Home," she said. "Which home?" "Ours." They had decided to sell the property in Malibu. There were too many memories, too many ghosts between those walls. Instead, they bought a simple house in Venice Beach, near the ocean, where they could start from scratch. The first night in... The new house was strange and wonderful at the same time. They had dinner on plastic plates because they still didn't have dishes, slept on a mattress on the floor because the furniture hadn't arrived, and talked until dawn about dreams, fears, plans for the future. "There's one thing I never asked you," Isabella said, lying next to him in the dark. "What? If you could go back in time, would you change anything about how we met?" Ethan was silent for so long that she thought he had fallen asleep. When he finally answered, his voice carried the weight of months of reflection. "I would change everything. I would meet you in a coffee shop or in a hospital or in a bookstore. I would invite you to dinner like a normal man. I would tell you about my life little by little, would let you decide if you wanted to be part of it without pressure, without manipulation." "And do you think it would have worked?" "I don't know. Maybe you would have run when you found out. About Sarah, about my problems, about my tendency to transform relationships into scientific experiments. Or maybe I would have stayed because you would have been honest from the beginning. It's possible." Isabella turned to her side, resting her head on her hand to look at him. "Want to know something?" "I do." "I wouldn't change anything. Even knowing all the pain you could have avoided." "Even so, because if we had met in a normal way, maybe we would never have connected so deeply. Maybe you would never have allowed yourself to be so vulnerable with me. And you would never have allowed yourself to love someone so complicated." "Exactly." They looked at each other in the dark, and Isabella saw in his face the same gratitude she felt in her chest. Gratitude for having survived, for having found a way through all the lies and manipulations, for having discovered that true love can be born even from the most unhealthy circumstances. "Isabella," Ethan said, touching her face gently. "Yes?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on me, for believing I could be better. Thank you for becoming better." They kissed in the dark of the new house, a kiss that was both an end and a beginning, the end of all the pain, manipulation, and obsession that had marked the beginning of their relationship. The beginning of something that neither had experienced before, true love, based on mutual acceptance and growth together. A year later, Isabella woke up to the smell of coffee and soft music coming from the kitchen. Ethan was preparing breakfast, humming a melody she didn't recognize. "New composition?" she asked, approaching him from behind and embracing him. "New composition," he confirmed, turning to kiss her. "To celebrate." "Celebrate what?" "1 year without episodes, without nightmares, without attempts to transform you into scientific data." Isabella laughed, remembering how far they had come. Ethan had undergone intensive therapy, had learned to deal with his obsessions in a healthy way, had discovered how to love without trying to control. She had learned to trust again, to allow herself to be vulnerable, to accept love without fear of being hurt. "And to celebrate something else," he continued, taking a small box from his pocket. Isabella felt her heart stop when she saw the box. "Ethan, I know it's early. I know we're still learning from each other, but I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve the love you give me." He knelt right there, in the messy kitchen of the small house, with disheveled hair and still in his pajamas. It wasn't the romantic marriage proposal from the movies, but it was perfect for them. "Isabella Santos," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple and elegant ring. "Will you marry me? Not because we're neurologically compatible, not because we can heal each other, but because I love you madly and want to build a normal and extraordinary life by your side." Isabella looked at the man kneeling in front of her, remembering the disturbed patient she had met in an isolated house between rocks and storms. She remembered all the lies, all the manipulations, all the nights of doubt and fear, and she also remembered all the mornings she woke up next to him, grateful for having chosen to fight instead of run. "Yes," she said, extending her hand for him to place the ring. "1,000 times yes." The kiss that followed was different from all the others they had shared. There was no desperation, no fear, no shadow of other relationships or unresolved traumas. It was just love, pure and simple, between two people who had learned that the best relationships aren't those that are born perfect, but those that become perfect through hard work and mutual forgiveness. 6 months later, they married in a small, intimate ceremony, with only close family and a few friends. Dr. Mitchell was Ethan's best man, in a gesture of forgiveness that had taken months to happen, but that symbolized that everyone had learned something from the mistakes of the past. During the vows, Ethan spoke about second chances and redemption. Isabella spoke about courage and choices. Both spoke about love that is born from true understanding, not from need or obsession. "When we met," Ethan said, holding her hands in front of the improvised altar in their garden, "I was a man who tried to use science to control feelings. You taught me that the best feelings are those that cannot be controlled, only lived." "When we met," Isabella responded, "I was a woman who cared for everyone except herself. You taught me that caring for someone we love is also caring for ourselves." The Justice of the Peace declared them husband and wife, and when they kissed, the guests applauded. But for Isabella, the most important sound was that of the birds singing in the trees, the sound of the normal and happy life they had managed to build together. That night, as they danced in the living room of their home, with soft music playing on the stereo, Isabella thought about all the choices that had brought them there. The right choices, the wrong choices, the desperate choices, and the brave choices. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, noticing her contemplative silence. "About choices," she answered, resting her head on his chest. "About how a single choice can change an entire life." "Which choice?" "The choice to stay when everything inside me screamed to run." "And do you regret it?" Isabella raised her eyes to him, seeing in her husband's face not the obsessive and disturbed man she had met, but the gentle and loving man he had become with hard work and mutual dedication. "Never," she said, "not for a second." They continued dancing in the small living room of the simple house, two survivors who had found in each other's love the healing they had sought their entire lives. Outside, Venice Beach shone under the starry sky, and the future stretched before them full of infinite possibilities. Ethan Blackwood would never again be the same man who had lost his sister at the beach, or who had seen his wife die among flames. Isabella Santos would never again be the same woman who had lost a child, or who had built her life on emotional restraint. They were new people, forged in the fire of their own choices, tempered by pain and polished by love. And as they danced in the soft moonlight that entered through the windows, both knew they had found what they had been searching for their entire lives without knowing they were searching. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of someone willing to carry that pain with them. Not perfection, but mutual acceptance of their imperfections. Not the end of problems, but the certainty that they would face all future problems together. 5 years later, Isabella was in the garden of the house watching Ethan teach their 3-year-old daughter to play piano on a child's version of the instrument. The little girl, Sarah, a name chosen in honor of the woman whose death had almost destroyed Ethan, but who had indirectly led Isabella to him, laughed as she hit the keys without rhythm or melody. "Not like that, Daddy," she said, trying to correct his fingers. "It has to be stronger." "Stronger how?" Ethan asked, pretending not to know, just to hear her explain again. "Like this." The little girl hit the keys with all the strength of her small fingers, creating a noise that sounded more like an explosion than music. Isabella smiled, placing her hand on her belly where their second child was growing. They had needed fertility treatment. The emotional scars from her first loss had created physical blocks as well. But with patience, love, and medical help, they had managed to build the family they both dreamed of. "How are my favorite musicians?" she asked, approaching the piano. "Mommy!" Sarah jumped from the bench and ran to hug her legs. "Daddy doesn't know how to play the piano right." "He doesn't?" Isabella feigned surprise. "But he taught me a beautiful song last week." "What song?" "The song he composed for you before you were born." Sarah looked at her father with renewed admiration. "You made a song for me?" "I did," Ethan confirmed, getting up from the piano. And approaching the two women in his life. Do you want to hear it? I do. He sat down again and began to play a soft and sweet melody, full of hope and love. It was completely different from the melancholic pieces he used to compose before. Isabella entered his life. This music spoke of possible futures, of simple joy, of love that grows instead of consuming. As he played, Isabella observed Sarah's face, saw the girl's eyes shine with the same passion for music that her father had inherited from the first. Sarah. It was as if the legacy of Ethan's dead wife continued alive, but transformed into something positive and constructive. It's beautiful, Daddy, Sarah said when the music ended. Thank you, my love. Can I learn to play it? Of course, but it will take time and a lot of practice. I have time, the girl declared with the absolute confidence of small children. Isabella and Ethan exchanged an amused look. Their daughter had inherited her father's obsessive determination, but also her mother's gentle patience. It was a combination that promised great things for the future. That night, after putting Sarah to bed, Isabella and Ethan sat on the porch, observing the stars over Venice Beach. It was a ritual they had developed over the years, a moment of silence and connection at the end of each day. Have you ever imagined how our life would be if we hadn't met? Isabella asked, leaning on his shoulder. I don't like to think about that. Why? Because I know exactly how it would be. I would be dead and you would be alone, caring for everyone except yourself. Isabella considered the answer, knowing it was probably correct. And now? Now we have a daughter who will change the world. Another baby coming, a house full of love, and a whole life ahead. It's almost too good to be true. It's real, Ethan said, kissing the top of her head. More real than anything I've ever lived. Isabella closed her eyes, feeling the gentle breeze of the Venice Beach night, hearing the distant sound of traffic from the city, feeling the baby move gently in her belly. It was a simple and extraordinary happiness at the same time, built on solid foundations of true love and mutual growth. Ethan, she said softly. Thank you. For what? For letting me save you. Thank you for letting me save you. They remained silent, knowing that both were right. They had saved each other, not through manipulation or obsession, but through true love, patience, and determination to be better for each other. The why story that had begun in an isolated house between rocks and storms had transformed into a life of everyday joy in a busy city. The man who had been consumed by guilt had become a loving father and dedicated husband. The woman who had hidden behind professional competence had become a courageous wife and fulfilled mother. And as the stars shone above them, Isabella and Ethan Blackwood knew they had found something that few people are lucky enough to find. A love that not only survives the storms, but becomes stronger because of them. A love that transforms two broken people into a whole family. A love that proves that the best stories are not those that begin perfect, but those that end with redemption.